She died, with her mouth sewn shut. A red thread ran through her cheeks, gums, and lips, so that no one would know what she had whispered to the king during the last week before his death. According to the royal surgeon's report, the body was found in the laundry room, wrapped in a pillowcase, unnamed, with signs of rough handling and putrefaction in the lower half of the torso. She was one of those who were not recorded in the chronicles, who were not allowed into the chapel, but were allowed into the bed, into the secret chambers, into the restless dreams of monarchs. From the end of October 1536, anxiety grew among the Villars at the court of King Philip. The old guards, especially those appointed from among the Walloons, noted that during the night shifts, dirty sheets, blood-stained hems, and even small jugs of human urine wrapped in black cloth were being carried out of the west wing of the palace. When questioned, they replied rudely, "It's from the baths. Mind your own business." But neither the baths nor the bath chambers were in use at that time. The pipes were filled with ice water, and all the staff had been dismissed. Young women began to disappear from the castle. According to the apothecary de Brun, from the end of autumn, the royal chamber began to resemble a hospital ward. The smell coming from the sovereign's chambers cannot be described without shuddering, sour, rotten, mixed with sweat and dried blood. The candles went out by themselves. Leeches fell off the skin before they had time to feed. Philip, by all accounts, did not get out of bed for more than 2 weeks. The windows were draped from the inside. The guards at the doors were changed every day, but no one knew the names of those who entered at midnight and left before dawn, with baskets covered with dog skins. They came one by one. Laundry women, maids, sometimes just foundlings from monasteries, who were temporarily assigned to serve the royal spirit. Not all of them returned. According to the physician's description, the king continued to ask for new faces, but did not recognize them. His eyes were glassy, his tongue was torn at the base, as if he himself had tried to tear it out with his teeth. Whispers began to circulate in the palace. He saw in them his mother, the devil, the one who had rejected him in his youth. Sometimes he would order, "Hang her by her hair. Only her hair can keep me in this world." A report by Bishop Artois, dated November 21st, contains the following entry. "The king demands that each of the women brought to him be given communion. He orders them to hold the bread and wine between their breasts before he will accept them." An attempt by the confessor to stop this madness was suppressed by the guards. They broke the chaplain's arm and threw him out through the kitchen door. No one else dared to enter. His body was covered with ulcers. Crimson patches appeared on the inside of his thighs, from which the skin was peeling off. His hands were shaking. He was tossing about, muttering the names of long-dead women he had been engaged to in his youth, and demanding that the heads of those who dared to look be cut off. In those days, there was much discussion at court about who would become regent in the event of his death. His son, a 10-year-old boy, raised in a monastery, had not appeared before his father since spring. Some knew that it was the boy's mother who had been found hanged in the tower 2 months before the events described. Her name had been crossed out of all the palace records. The servants who were tasked with cleaning his chambers demanded twice as much salt as usual. The food they brought was left untouched. Feces were collected in the chamber pots, filled with rosemary and vomit. The body emitted the stench of rotting, musky flesh and old blood. He no longer spoke, only coughed, sometimes throwing pieces of skin or teeth out of his mouth. He was rubbed with camphor ointment, but even experienced doctors refused to continue the procedure, some complaining of a burning pain in their throats after each visit to his bedroom. Among those brought to him girls began to appear. The youngest, according to reports, was 9 years old. Her name was Marget. 3 days later, she was found dead in a bucket with the remains of ointment. The body was taken to the boiler room. Her name disappeared from all the records. After that, the servants began to pray in the corridors. By the end of December, the king could not breathe without a tube inserted into his throat. He began to have convulsions and gnawed his fingers to the bone. His mouth whistled, and his phlegm was streaked with black. He demanded that his groin be rubbed with ashes. She won't come if there are no ashes. Only then will she believe that I have repented. Archival entry for January 3rd. The body of a young woman with her mouth sewn shut was carried out of the laundry room. The next day, the king was not even recognized by his own guards. It was Mariette. Her resurrection in the stories of the maids was what finally broke the last taboos. The guards were replaced. Something like a siege began. The royal chambers were surrounded. The doors were boarded up. Only he, 2 surgeons, and the last holy mistress remained inside. A mute adult woman who had arrived from a women's shelter a month before the madness began. Her fate remained unknown. The servants who were allowed into the West Wing after the doors were broken down on the night of January 9th gave similar accounts. The rooms were bone-chillingly cold. The curtains were soaked with blood and mold. Dust lay in thick layers on the floor, as if no one had been there for months. The air was still. The king lay on the bed. He did not move. One of his eyes was cut open and resembled a festering wound. The other was covered with a coin. Under his body was a pillow soaked through with blood and some grey liquid oozing from open sores in his lower abdomen. His fingers were bound with leather cords. The doctors claimed that otherwise he would bite them off in fits of convulsions. On the table were plates with dried food, mouldy bread, and gnawed pigeon bones. Leaning against the wall were 2 women's shoes of different sizes and 2 nightcaps, one covered in bloodstains, the other wet and smelling of vinegar. In the corner stood a bucket, crawling with worms. The walls were covered with scrawled phrases. "She's watching. Don't let her in. Blood won't accept me." The court physician's notes, dated the same day, read, "On examination, the body is limp, skin temperature is below normal, signs of gangrene on the feet, smell of death. The mouth is clamped shut with a rag. Inside are fragments of tissue, possibly of female origin. The tongue is partially bitten off. The rectum is torn. There are clots of dirt and blood under the fingernails. Signs of sexual assault cannot be ruled out. No official cause of death was given. The report was sent to the archbishop without a signature. Rumors spread through the palace. People said that no one had been allowed to see him in his last days, not because he was dying, but because he was no longer human. One of the servants swore that he had heard not speech, but a grinding sound behind the wall at night. It sounded as if someone was gnawing on wood. Another claimed to have seen a woman coming out of his room naked, but her skin was covered in soot. When the body was carried out, a fog hung over the castle, and light snow was falling. He was wrapped in a coarse cloth, not royal fabrics. The servants kept their distance. No one wanted to come closer than 5 steps. One of the soldiers, the one who carried the stretcher at the back, later went mad and was isolated in a monastery cell. He claimed that he was not carrying a human being, but a doll stuffed with hair. And the hair was alive, he added convulsively. The body was carried through the North Passage. The main route was blocked. The staircase leading to the throne room was covered with slime, and several people slipped. The roof of the West Tower collapsed on the same day. Bishop Artois' report stated, "A sign of decay has descended upon the crown. Embalming began that same evening. The records describe the disaster. When the internal organs were removed, the surgeons began to vomit. The liver had decomposed into a pulp. The gallbladder burst when touched. The heart, or what was left of it, crumbled into pieces like congealed blood. We did not find a single organ intact. Everything inside was corroded, as if by acid. In the abdominal cavity were 4 gold rings, hair, and a bundle of fabric, identical in composition to that used in women's undershirts, wrote one of the doctors. It was decided not to open the head. One of the servants claimed that during the night, when the body was lying in the basement where it was being prepared for display, he heard whispering and sounds like someone scraping wood from the inside. But when I lifted the lid, it was quiet, and it smelled of lavender. The official chronicle, compiled by 3 scribes the next day, contained only the following statement: "The king died after a long illness, peacefully, surrounded by his loved ones." No names were mentioned, no women, no indication that during the last 2 months, people without a name had been allowed to visit him. One morning, a woman came to the monastery in Bourges. She was mute. Her fingers were burned. She left a bundle. Inside was a nightgown embroidered with a crown, bitten through at the throat. The priest who took the bundle wrote in his diary, "I felt that I was holding his heart in my hands, cold and wet." The bundle was hidden and later lost. The woman disappeared. A week after embalming, the body was taken to the chapel of St. Mary Magdalene. It lay on a stone platform under a dark cloth, through which stains seeped. The courtiers kept their distance. No one came closer than the ritual required. The body emitted a foul odor, despite being rubbed with vinegar, myrrh, and sulfur. The candles burned poorly. One of them went out 3 times. It was recorded, "An unclean force wandered in the air." The priest assigned to perform the funeral service refused to enter the chapel. When questioned, he said, "I heard a woman's voice begging for mercy, and then a scream. Not the scream of a living person." He was sent to the monastery of Saint-Denis. Diagnosis: mental disorder. Witnesses claimed that on the night the body was displayed, a woman stood at the window of the chambers, dressed all in black, her face covered. She stared inside, motionless. In the morning, a dried wreath of women's hair, woven into a ring of barley straw, was found on the windowsill. Meanwhile, purges began at court. The first to disappear was the cook, who, on the king's orders, prepared night meals for the guests without a name. It was said that he was found in a well, his stomach cut open and filled with dry rose petals. Then the maid who watched over the cleaning of the beds disappeared. Her hair was found in a cauldron where laundry was being boiled. No one looked for the culprits. Whispers spread through the palace. "They are covering their tracks." The court guard's records read, "We were ordered not to let women without a seal into the south wing." The seal was a ring with the crown's coat of arms. But those who brought letters came anyway, all from the same name. The handwriting was female. There was no signature. The king wrote little in his last weeks, but his instructions, left on the margins of books, have been preserved. "She is rotting inside me. A mixture of tartar and immortelle root does not help. She breathes when I sleep." Historians believe that he was not referring to his wife. The queen was in isolation at the time, in the castle of Saint-Martin, and correspondence with her had been cut off. Denunciations appeared. 3 women who were not listed in the court records were allegedly at court as conversation partners. None of them had official status, a surname, or a salary. The servants called them cover girls. It was claimed that they entered through the service entrances and stayed overnight. Their descriptions varied: tall with a birthmark on her temple, Red-haired, with black nails, silent, with no eyebrows, they all disappeared after the king's death. One of the scribes wrote, "These women were not concubines. They were a curse. They exuded coldness." When an old oven was opened in the basement, where used bandages and clothes were burned, bone fragments were found, thin, as if from women or teenagers. No one investigated. A master embalmer later wrote, "We were told not to ask questions. Everything we burned was nameless. But one of the skulls had a gold tooth." At that time, riots broke out in the capital. People demanded explanations. Why did the bell above the tower not ring? Why was there no mourning? Why wasn't the body shown to the people? Portraits of a woman with her face crossed out began to appear in the streets, supposedly the one who caused the king's downfall. The church banned the images. The archbishop declared, "There is no sin worse than a woman who leads a king to bed without a crown." Rumors turned into prayers. In monasteries, psalms about the expulsion of the spirit of fornication began to be read. On the walls of some churches, stains appeared that resembled the silhouette of a woman with bare breasts. In the villages, lynchings began. Several widows were accused of witchcraft and burned without trial. One of the bishops wrote in his personal journal, "The king did not die of poison, nor did he die of illness. His body was consumed by a desire that took flesh and entered him." On the international stage, the monarch's death left the country in a vulnerable position. His son was a minor. The court council was divided. Some demanded a regency in favor of the queen. Others demanded abdication. Catholics accused reformers of debauchery and corruption of the throne. The court was plunged into a cold war between factions, where the secret life of the king became a weapon. Everyone claimed that it was the enemy who had sent the women. A report from the Spanish ambassador states, "They are called nothing less than witches, but it was his choice." On the night of February 7th, the palace was surrounded by guards. By order of the council, the East Wing, the Wing of Mirrors, where the king's apartments had previously been located, was sealed off. According to an internal report, the reason was damage to the ceilings and the threat of collapse. But those close to the king knew that a hidden passage had been found in the walls, leading to a narrow stone room with no windows. On the floor were charred pieces of fabric, strands of hair, and dried dark liquid in the cracks in the tiles. The servant who discovered the entrance died 3 days later. His tongue was swollen, and his eyes were red and bleeding. The medical report stated the body emitted a smell like rotten chicken eggs. The larynx was corroded, an unclear black residue was found in the lungs. The priest who performed the funeral service struck his head twice on the marble floor and was taken to his cell. He repeated only, "Her eyes were open." The council decided to remove all traces. The room was bricked up. The walls were covered with lead sheets and covered with a fresco of St. Agatha. A week later, moisture stains appeared on the fresco, resembling the outline of a woman's silhouette. The cleaning work was stopped. The archbishop issued an order. Do not touch. Do not speak. Do not pray. At the same time, there was a crisis in embalming. The king's body, resting in the monastery crypt, began to decompose despite all measures taken. Servants complained of a stench that penetrated even through the sealed doorways. It was recorded. A yellowish coating appeared on the fingers. The skin was cracking. White fat oozed from the seams. One of the monks wrote in his diary, "Every time we lit the censer, it went out as if there was no air in the crypt, but you could feel breathing." The queen refused to attend the funeral. In a letter addressed only to the council, she stated, "I will not go up to the bed of one who slept with the faceless." She was isolated on the pretext of illness. The reality was that the queen demanded that all the rooms where the nameless women were staying be searched. At her insistence, 7 rooms were cleansed by fire. The beds were burned, the floors were torn up, the walls were scalded with boiling water and rubbed with salt. Those who were nearby were sent to monasteries for repentance. Outside the palace, things were no better. The church was divided. Some bishops believed that the king's death was punishment for a secret sin. Others claimed that it was the work of a woman with knowledge. A witch hunt began. Hundreds of women were arrested on the basis of denunciations. Signs of guilt included the presence of tinctures, dried herbs in pillows, hidden amulets, the absence of a husband, or a mole in the groin. 47 people were burned at the stake in 42 days. 9 of them were pregnant. Council documents confirmed that some executions took place without trial. The basis for this was letters allegedly found in the bedroom of the late king. They described methods of subjugating a man's will by drinking lily petals and saliva. But none of the letters were signed. The paper was stained when exposed to fire. Meanwhile, the body still could not be completely isolated. The king's face was swollen. His ears were blackened. A thick, wax-like liquid oozed from his nostrils. When the sarcophagus was opened for a second viewing, several clergymen fainted. Doctors said, "This is not natural." One of them, an old embalmer, confessed, "I have seen bodies rotting from the plague. This is different. It is as if he is rotting from the inside, at the will of someone else." No one mentioned the name of that woman or women, but within the walls where they lived, sounds continued to be heard at night. Barefoot footsteps, clicking joints, heavy breathing. One of the night guards went mad and ran out of the palace screaming, "She was looking through my face." The archives record that on the eve of the State Council in March, where a regent was to be appointed, a note appeared in the meeting room. The paper was fresh. The handwriting was the same as on the notes to the king. There was only one sentence: "I am still here." No witnesses were found. The locks were locked. And all this was happening against a backdrop of political pressure. Neighboring powers demanded clarity. Who was in power? Where was the queen? Why had the heir not been crowned? Who was behind the refusal to declare official mourning? In response, the ambassadors received vague letters about internal transitional arrangements. All diplomatic receptions were cancelled. The embassies temporarily left the capital, but among the people, things were different. They knew that the king had been ruined by a woman, not a witch, not poison, but a woman who had been allowed in without a name, without prayer, and without a crown. It was said that the monastery chronicles contained a list of concubines who had never been recorded, and that they did not die, but disappeared in smoke. One such chronicle read, "They were given the keys to the king's heart, and they did not ask why." In the spring, famine struck the capital, not because of a poor harvest, but because of fear. Caravans stopped entering the city, merchants disappeared, and markets lay deserted. People said that anyone who approached the palace fell ill. Their skin peeled, their mouths tasted of rot, and at night they dreamed of faceless women. One appeared, particularly often, dressed in red, with a bald head and a slashed stomach. Local priests called for prayer, but the churches were empty. People burned their beds, smeared garlic on their windows, and boarded up their doors from the inside. Meanwhile, the king's body was still not buried. On the third attempt at embalming, the abdominal cavity opened up. The intestines were black and blue and swollen. The liver was found to contain numerous abscesses filled with a grey mass that smelled of rotten metal. The autopsy report stated, "The material is rotting with constant bubbling." The surgeon's fingers were covered with a rash within a few hours. The veins spread at the slightest touch. The crypt where the procedure was performed was permanently closed. One of the doctors soon went blind. The second died. He was found drowned face down in a vat of herbal decoction. A week later, the king's younger brother died. He suffocated in his sleep. His face turned black. Blood flowed from his nose, and there was a mark on his chest, as if he had been held by the heart for a long time. Witnesses claimed that he screamed, calling out the name of a woman that no one could hear. The next morning, an old mirror covered with cracks was found in the chambers. Although none of the servants had brought it, the council gathered in a closed hall. It was decided that no woman who had previously lived in the Wing of Mirrors could leave the monastery. 2 tried to escape. One was found in the forest, charred. The other disappeared without a trace. To this day, she is listed in the archives as disappeared by an unknown force. There is no public mention of this. However, the personal diary of the court archivist contains the following entry: "You cannot kill what has not been named." Meanwhile, a young heir was placed on the throne. The widowed queen became regent. Her hands were covered with a rash, which she hid with gloves. It was said that she did not sleep at night, but sat in front of lit candles, repeating, "Don't let it in, don't let it in." All the mirrors in the palace were removed and broken. The sharp shards were kept in a chest sealed with wax and lead. When the king's body was finally secretly taken away at night and buried outside the city walls, a crowd of common people knelt down, but not out of grief, but out of fear. One eyewitness wrote, "When the lid of the coffin touched the ground, all the lights in the houses went out. The church refused to perform the funeral service. The monks signed for their payment, but remained silent. No cross was placed over the grave, only a heavy stone slab engraved with the words, 'He belonged to everyone, and he died without a name.'" Only later did chroniclers record that after the monarch's death, a 3-year period of instability began in the country. The treasuries were empty. Bishops argued among themselves about who should be considered the true protector of the throne. One ambassador wrote, "There is no will left here, only fear and shadows." A conspiracy spread among the people. One of the women in the secret chambers had given a birth to a child who was growing up in a monastery, hidden from the world like a new curse. In the diary of the last court physician, who fled 2 months after the monarch's death, there is an entry. "I don't know who she was, but I know that he called her at night, and his skin rotted from the call. I saw faith dissolve into pus and power into fear. Now all that remains is the smell and empty mirrors." Thus ended the ruler whose life belonged to many and whose death belonged to no one. And the country that once held the land and conscience in its fist was left with a nameless woman who entered the chambers and never left.